Vargas's world consisted of scents, vibrations, and pain. He did not remember who he had been before his body was covered in fur as coarse as bark, and his fingers transformed into bone-blade claws. To humans, he was the terror of the plateau, a legend used to frighten disobedient children. To himself, he was simply a void, eternally hungry. He lived in a cave where the walls wept with cold water. His days were spent hunting, and his nights in attempts to drown out the echoes of human voices he had heard centuries ago. He hated humans. They smelled of fear, cheap metal, and lies. Every time they entered his forest with torches, he tore them to pieces, feeling nothing but a brief satisfaction in the silence that followed their screams. But Alice smelled different. She appeared in his territory on a day when the sky was draped in ashen clouds. Vargas watched her from the thicket. She did not look like a hunter. She carried no weapon. In her hands was only a woven basket, and on her face was a strange serenity. He prepared to spring. His muscles coiled, claws digging into the soft earth. He waited for that exact moment when she would sense his presence, when her pupils would dilate with terror, and her heart would beat in the rhythm of a death agony. Alice stopped near a bush of rare blue fern. She leaned down, carefully cutting a leaf. In that moment, the wind shifted, and Vargas intentionally stepped out of the shadows, letting his massive silhouette block the sun. His low growl made the ancient pines shudder. She turned around. Vargas expected a scream. But there was no scream. Alice looked directly at him, at a creature 7 feet tall, with a torn maw and eyes that glowed with yellow phosphorus. She did not flinch. She simply watched. And then, she smiled. Not defiantly, not as a challenge. It was a soft, tired smile of someone who had found what they were looking for. She reached out. In her palm lay a piece of candied apple, a rare treat in these poor lands. The beast froze. His instincts shrieked, "Kill her. It's a trap." But in her scent, there wasn't a drop of adrenaline. Only the aroma of dried lavender and honesty. Weeks passed. Vargas did not kill her that day. He didn't know why. Perhaps her deafness confused him, she didn't hear the terrifying roar that paralyzed others. To her, he was just a large, mangled part of the forest. She began to come every day. She left herbs near his cave that soothed the pain in his old wounds. Vargas watched. First from the trees, then from a distance of 10 paces. One evening, a downpour began. Alice couldn't make it back to the village in time and hid under a rocky overhang near his lair. She was shivering from the cold. The beast saw her skin turning blue. Something stirred in his chest, something forgotten that wasn't hunger. He approached her. Alice lifted her head, her hair clinging to her face. Vargas did not growl. He lay down beside her, letting the heat of his massive body warm her. She carefully, barely touching him, placed her hand on his stiff nape. In that moment, for the first time in centuries, Vargas felt not rage, but peace. It was like light breaking through a thick fog. He realized, love is not the words he had forgotten. Love is the choice not to cause pain when you have total power to do so. Every meeting with Alice was a painful lesson for Vargas. His body, built for killing, now felt like a clumsy prison. He watched her thin fingers sort through St. John's wort and felt shame for his claws, which could fell an oak in one stroke. One day she brought a small mirror, a fragment of polished bronze. She held it up to Vargas's face. The beast flinched, seeing his reflection, yellow eyes, scars crossing his snout, fangs protruding from beneath his lip. He growled at himself, recoiling into the depths of the cave. Alice was not afraid. She approached him and placed her palm against his chest, directly over his heart. She looked into his eyes so long and intently, as if trying to pull his true form out from under the layers of fur and fury. Then she began to draw in the sand. She drew a sun, a house, and two figures holding hands. One was small, that was her. The other was large, but it didn't look like a monster, it was the figure of a man. She pointed at Vargas, and then at the drawing of the man. Something cracked in the beast's head. A flash of pain made him close his eyes. Images rose before him, rusted armor, the taste of wine, a child's laughter, and fire. A great fire that he had started himself. He had been a general whose name once made cities tremble. His curse was no accident, it was a gift from the goddess of wrath, who had heard his prayer before a decisive battle, make me a force that no steel can stop. He got what he asked for. But along with the strength, he lost everything that made life worth protecting. Looking at Alice, he realized she was his chance for the forgiveness he never dared to ask for. In the village of Lower Slope, silence reigned, but it was the silence before a storm. People had noticed that Alice was returning from the forest later than usual. "She carries food to him," whispered Thomas the blacksmith in the local tavern. "I saw her tracks near the edge of the Black Plateau. And beside them were his tracks. Huge, with claws the size of my knife." "She's a witch," added the old village elder. "She's conspired with the beast. Maybe she's grooming him to attack us in winter when our supplies run low." Fear is a disease that spreads faster than plague. The villagers, who had lived in the shadow of terror for years, now found an object for their rage. They couldn't kill the beast, but they could punish the one who became his voice. They seized her. Alice struggled, trying to explain with gestures that the beast was not dangerous. But to them, her rapid hand movements looked like magic spells. They threw her into an old granary, boarding up the doors. "If the beast comes for her, we'll set an ambush," Thomas spat. "If not, she'll burn with this shed as the demon's accomplice." Vargas felt something was wrong when the sun vanished and the familiar scent of lavender did not appear. The wind brought another aroma, smoke, char, and the sweat of many angry men. He didn't just walk, he ran. Huge leaps carried him over ravines. His heart, which had been a cold stone for so long, now hammered in his chest like a frightened bird. He bypassed the village using the shadows. His scent led him to the granary. He heard her, she wasn't crying, but her breathing was ragged. She was beating against the boards with her hands. Vargas approached the back wall. He could have smashed it with one blow, but that would draw the attention of the hunters. He began to act quietly. With his sharp claws, he began to remove nail after nail, board after board, acting with a surgical precision he had learned while picking flowers with her. When a gap opened, he saw her. Alice froze. She saw his massive eye in the crack. She wasn't afraid. She slid her hand through and touched his snout. In that moment, Vargas realized. He didn't just love her. She was his soul, which he had once sold and now found again. But at that moment, a bell rang. "He's here. The beast is in the village," a sentry screamed. Arrows pierced the air. One of them, with a jagged tip, sank into Vargas's shoulder. He roared, not from pain, but from fury for her. Vargas shielded the opening of the granary, becoming a living wall between Alice and the approaching crowd. "Shoot! Shoot for the eyes!" Thomas yelled. Vargas stepped forward. His roar was so powerful that glass shattered in the nearest houses. But he did not attack. He remembered Alice's lessons on softness. If he shed blood now, he would confirm their worst fears. Thomas swung his heavy hammer. Vargas reacted instantly. He didn't strike the man with his claws. He simply caught the heavy iron head of the hammer in his maw. There was a screech of metal against fangs. Vargas clenched his jaws, and the tempered steel shattered like a dry biscuit. He spat the fragments at Thomas's feet and pushed him away with a flat paw, strong, but without bared claws. Alice scrambled out of the granary. She ran forward, standing directly in front of the massive beast, her small arms spread wide. She began to gesture desperately. She pointed to the beast's heart, then to the sky, then to herself. She tried to tell them how he had warmed her in the cold, how he had wept in his sleep. Suddenly, a little girl stepped out of the crowd. "It's him," she said softly. "He's not mean. He's just big." Fear began to recede, replaced by shame. People began to lower their weapons. But Vargas felt his time running out. The arrows were poisoned with sleep root juice. His vision blurred. He sank to his knees before Alice, his heavy head resting on her shoulder. As the first rays of dawn touched his fur, the change began. It wasn't painful, it was like old, dry skin peeling off a snake. Claws retracted into human fingers. The coarse fur fell away, revealing pale skin covered in arrow scars. The massive snout shifted into the features of a man in his 40s, with deep lines around his eyes and silver in his hair. He opened his eyes. They were no longer phosphorus yellow. They were human, dark brown, and full of tears. He tried to speak, but his throat, which for centuries had only growled, produced only a soft moan. Alice looked at him with wonder. She didn't know this man, but she recognized the same gaze, the look of a lonely soul that had finally found home. Years passed. A new legend appeared in the village of Lower Slope. They spoke of a strange man who lived in a small cabin at the forest's edge with a deaf herbalist. He never spoke, but his hands could heal any wound. Vargas never regained his speech. Perhaps he felt human language was too poor for what he felt. Or perhaps he simply enjoyed the silence he shared with Alice, a silence where there was no room for beasts, but plenty of room for love. He was no longer the beast that learned to love a human. He became the man whom love had set free from the beast. While the poison of the sleep root pulsed through his veins, Vargas plummeted into a whirlpool of visions he had hidden from himself for centuries. In these dreams, he was not a beast. He was General Vargas von Rain, the iron wedge of an empire long turned to dust. He saw himself on a horse, clad in blackened armor that shimmered under a blood-red sun. His voice, then loud and commanding, gave orders that doomed thousands to death. He remembered the siege of the city of Selim. The citizens begged for mercy, but in Vargas's heart, there was nothing but cold calculation. "Burn it all," he had said then, looking at the golden domes of the temples. It was there, amidst the ashes, that he met an old woman with eyes that glowed with white fire. She was the high priestess of the goddess of retribution. While his soldiers looted the city, she stood in the middle of the square, unflinching. "Do you wish to be invincible, Colonel?" she asked, her voice echoing directly in his mind. "Do you want no steel to be able to withstand your might? Your wish shall be granted. But you will lose everything that makes victory sweet. You will become the embodiment of your own rage. Your skin will become bark, your fingers swords, and your heart a cold stone. And you shall live forever until you find what you destroyed here today in Selim." He had laughed in her face. An hour later, as the sun set, his bones began to break and rearrange. His scream turned into a roar, and his men, seeing the monster in their commander's armor, fled in panic. Vargas woke from this memory in the granary, feeling human tears sting his new, sensitive eyes. He realized, Alice was the complete opposite of everything he had been. He destroyed, she healed. He commanded, she listened with her heart. The process of returning to human life was not an instantaneous miracle, but a daily agony. His new body was weak, vulnerable to cold and pain. Every step echoed in his back, where the massive muscles of the beast once were. For the first weeks after the death of the beast, Alice kept him a secret. The villagers believed the monster had fled into the mountains to die of its wounds. They didn't know that in her small hut, a man with hair as gray as ash lay on the stove, his hands trembling as he tried to hold a wooden spoon. Alice taught him everything anew. One evening, she brought him a bowl of hot broth. Vargas, by the habit of the beast, tried to lean over it and lap from the edge. Alice gently stopped him. She placed a spoon in his hand and showed him how to use it. It was incredibly humbling for a former general and former king of the forest, but in her eyes, there was no mockery. Only patience. She taught him silence. Not the silence of a hunter waiting for prey, but the silence of contemplation. They sat on the porch, and she pointed to the stars. Before, he had seen them only as landmarks for night hunting. Now, he saw beauty. He began to help her with herbs. His vast knowledge of the forest, gained over hundreds of years in the form of a beast, now served medicine. He knew where the sweetest lungwort grew and where to find the root that stops a fever. He could not speak, but he drew maps for her in the sand, pointing to secret places where no hunter dared to go. The peace did not last long. One day, Thomas came to their hut, the same blacksmith whose hammer Vargas had shattered. Thomas brought his son, who had a deep wound from wolf fangs. "Alice, help," the man pleaded. "The old apothecary in the village says the leg must be cut off, or he'll die by morning." Alice looked at the wound. It was inflamed, with black streaks, a sign of forest rot. She knew her strength was not enough. She looked at Vargas, who sat in the shadows of the corner, his hood pulled over his face. Vargas stood up. His figure, even in human form, was tall and imposing. Thomas recoiled, instinctively looking for a weapon that wasn't there. Vargas approached the boy. He knew this smell. It was the smell of death, with which he had been friends for centuries. He placed his hands on the wound. His fingers, which remembered every path in the forest, began to quickly sort through a mixture of herbs he had prepared himself. He knew the secret: one had to not just apply the medicine, but press the poison out with a specific movement he had learned by watching snakes hunt in the thickets. The boy cried out. Thomas rushed forward, but Alice stopped him, placing a hand on his chest. An hour later, the fever broke. The boy fell into a peaceful sleep. The blacksmith looked at the strange, silent man with a mixture of terror and gratitude. "Who are you?" Thomas whispered. Vargas said nothing. He only looked at his hands, hands that, for the first time in many lifetimes, had saved rather than taken. Over time, Vargas's presence in the village became familiar. People called him the Silent Giant. They still feared his heavy gaze, but they no longer tried to burn his home. The real change happened inside him. Vargas began to notice things that had previously been mere background. He saw how sunlight played on a spiderweb, how Alice rejoiced at the first spring rain. He realized that being human is not just about having a human body. It is the ability to feel another's pain as your own. The goddess's curse was not just a punishment, but a long road to purification. He had to become a beast to understand how precious a human heart is. One autumn day, when the forest was dressed in gold and crimson, Vargas and Alice went to the very spot where they first met. The blue fern still grew there. Vargas knelt and took Alice's hand in his. He couldn't say, "I love you." He couldn't tell her about his past crimes or how she had saved his soul. But he did something else. He took from his pocket the small piece of bronze, the same mirror she had once given him. He looked into it and, for the first time, did not turn away. He saw a man who had walked through hell and returned. He turned the mirror so that both of them were reflected in it. Alice leaned her head against his shoulder. In that silence, in the middle of the ancient forest that was no longer a hunting ground for him, Vargas finally found his peace. He was no longer the beast that learned to love a human. He became the man whom love had set free from the beast.